repealing and replacing Obamacare.
We want to do this at the same time, and in some cases in the same bill.
The House backs legislation bringing President Obama's health care law one step closer to being dismantled. We're on Capitol Hill with today's vote. Lawsuit dropped. A key Planned Parenthood ally backs away from legal action it filed against the undercover journalist who exposed the abortion provider's practices. We get his reaction from California. Catholics in Congress.
I hope all of us can have a bit more humility in the months and years ahead.
We'll introduce you to a new freshman congressman in our ongoing series. And preparations for World Youth Day 2019. A look at what's to come and how the massive Catholic event has shaped younger generations. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, January 13th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Congress takes action on Obamacare. The House overwhelmingly passes legislation that is the first step towards repealing President Barack Obama's divisive health care law. Jason Calvi has been following the vote on Capitol Hill. Jason?
Wyatt, 227 for, 198 against. It was a party line vote, but 9 Republicans voted against it. It clears the way for a repeal bill to move forward in the Senate without the threat of a Democratic filibuster. Today's legislation doesn't need to be signed by the president and wouldn't actually change a word of the law. But its passage is critical if Republicans are to keep their long-standing promise to do away with Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood.
Today on the House floor, Democrats make the case for Obama's controversial health care law.
All we get from them are repeal bills, repeal bills, repeal bills. Not once was there a replacement bill offered.
But Republicans who control Congress say the law is saddled with problems.
This law is collapsing while we speak. We have to step in before things get worse. This is nothing short of a rescue mission.
Democrats promise a fight.
This is a fight worth having. Protecting people's health care is something that we all should be dedicated to, and we're going to fight you on this.
The GOP is attaching a measure to defund Planned Parenthood to the Obamacare repeal.
Planned Parenthood is not the be-all, end-all for women's health. It simply is not. It is a storefront for doing abortions.
Speaker Ryan says funds given to Planned Parenthood will go to health centers.
For every Planned Parenthood, there are 20 federal community health centers. They're vastly bigger in network. There are so many more of them, and they provide these kinds of services without all the controversy surrounding this issue.
Now, we should remind our viewers that the HHS mandate that is a part of Obamacare forced employers to cover birth control, abortion-inducing drugs, and sterilization. Private businesses and nonprofits like our own network sued the administration over it. They say the mandate forces them to violate their conscience. We'll have to see what happens next, but stay right here, tuned to EWTN News Nightly for the next step.
Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. The medical research company that illegally profited from the sale of baby body parts has dropped its lawsuit against the undercover journalist who exposed the company's practices. David Daleiden videotaped conversations between STEM Express and Planned Parenthood, leading to a congressional investigation. David Daleiden joins us now from California. David, the House Select Panel on Infant Lives recently referred STEM Express to law enforcement agencies for further investigation. Do you believe that's why STEM Express dropped their lawsuit against you?
I definitely think it's part of it. You know, STEM Express has been relying on the same discredited legal theory as Planned Parenthood and the National Abortion Federation, which is this idea that somehow undercover work can be construed as a form of fraud if you're the one who got caught in the undercover journalism operation. And that theory has been rejected by courts again and again and again as more and more details from Select Panel and other official investigations have come to light about STEM Express's true activities, corroborating everything that CMP alleged in the videotapes. I think it's really clear that they don't have a case and they had far more to lose by going forward than by just dropping it and walking away. So I think their essentially unconditional surrender sends a really strong message about the relative meritlessness of these cases.
So then, noting that, how do you think the STEM Express dropping its lawsuit will impact the other lawsuits against you?
Well, I think it shows that the legal theories they're relying on are totally discredited at this point. And ultimately, the video camera doesn't lie, and the public has a right to know about what organizations like Planned Parenthood and their allies and proxies in the abortion industry and their business partners like STEM Express are doing with their taxpayer dollars, and that exposing that is not some kind of form of fraud. It's not an invasion of privacy, but it's investigative journalism par excellence, and it's protected by the First Amendment.
Well, all indications are that Congress will defund Planned Parenthood. If that happens, what's next for you?
Well, we are currently waiting for a ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on this real unconstitutional prior restraint and gag order from a federal judge in San Francisco that has to do with basically the remaining half of the body of evidence that we collected at the annual meetings of the National Abortion Federation, which is about 50% Planned Parenthood in its leadership and in its membership anyway. That footage is some of the most gruesome and incriminating footage that we ever recorded. And if we get the green light on that, you can expect to see another video a week from that material for the foreseeable future.
Well, we will continue to follow you on your latest projects. David Delighten, project lead at the Center for Medical Progress. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
And pro-lifers have more reason to feel hopeful as Congress takes its first step to block a law that would legalize assisted suicide in the nation's capital. Senator James Lankford, a Republican from Oklahoma, introduced a resolution opposing D.C.'s so-called Death with Dignity Act this week. He says the law would, quote, erode our culture's respect for life. The resolution must be passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the president to block the D.C. law. It's 1 week until Inauguration Day, and President-elect Donald Trump says he's not concerned some of his cabinet picks have contradicted him at their confirmation hearings. Trump tweeting, "All of my cabinet nominees are looking good and doing a great job. I want them to be themselves and express their own thoughts, not mine." Those differences include relations with Russia, Muslim immigration, and torture. He also told reporters in New York potential disagreements, quote, all get worked out. The president-elect says Democrats shouldn't be complaining about a new probe into how the FBI investigated Hillary Clinton's private email server. Trump says Clinton shouldn't have been allowed to run for president in the first place. The Justice Department's internal watchdog has launched a new probe into the way the department, and the FBI specifically, handled Hillary Clinton's private email server investigation. The Justice Department has been criticized for how it handled the investigation, especially when it came to how the public was notified. Democrats blame FBI Director James Comey for contributing to their 2016 loss. Comey dropped a bombshell in late October, saying the FBI found more emails that could be connected to the investigation into her handling of classified material, which had months earlier seemed closed.
I think steps were taken by the director of the FBI near the election, which were not precedented. His statement about whether there was going to be an opening of an investigation, a closing of an investigation, I don't think was fair, professional, or consistent with the policies of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Sentiments that are somewhat shared by Republican Representative Jason Chaffetz from Utah.
I don't think it was the factor in swaying the election, but I think it was a factor, and we should look at it.
The review will examine several allegations, including that DOJ and FBI employees improperly disclosed non-public information, and that the timing of the FBI's release of certain Freedom of Information Act requests right before the election was improper.
No American should be okay with interventions by our government officials or certainly by foreign powers to try and doing things that might have some undue influence on the outcome of the election.
The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, says he does not believe Russian interference changed the outcome of the presidential election. In testimony last week, he said it did not impact voting machines and did not alter the vote tallies. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Iraqi Special Forces enter Mosul University, a tactical victory and a step forward in battling ISIS for control of the city. The university is a symbolic landmark in Iraq's second largest city. It was once used by ISIS as a base. The Mosul operation is in its 4th month, and Iraqi forces have retaken about a third of the city. The fight to liberate the city is likely to last many more months. And as Christians in the Middle East face extinction, one member of Congress is vowing to protect them. Nebraska's Jeff Fortenberry, a 7th-term congressman, has a plan to make sure the United States comes to the aid of the persecuted.
We got the genocide designation passed. What is the best thing to do right now is to focus on a key phrase: personnel is policy. So the right people in the State Department, the right people in the White House who are appropriately sensitized to this set of problems would be most helpful.
Fortenberry says he also wants to empower Christians in the region to fight and to protect themselves. Pope Francis has written a letter to young people ahead of a gathering of bishops about youth in 2018. He tells them, "You are in my heart." One young lady says she's moved by the Holy Father's concern.
And Papa Francisco is a perfect example of someone that listen our instance, that listen our questions. So we'd like that the Church will be able to follow the example of Papa Francisco.
The Vatican held a press conference today outlining initiatives that will take place in preparation for next year's Synod. For more on the upcoming Synod, Mary Shevlin joins us now from Rome. Mary, the Holy Father is sending out a questionnaire to bishops all over the world ahead of the Synod in 2018. What's in it and what's the goal?
Well, the questions are general, applied to young people all over the world, but there's also questions that are specific to each continent, because these questions will be sent to each bishop's conference throughout the world on all the 5 continents. So there's some questions specific to different regions in the world and the challenges that young people are facing there. So, and besides that questionnaire, we also will have a website beginning March 1st, which the Synod of Bishops will unveil. Also on that website will be questions for young people to answer from all over the world, Catholic or not. They're welcome to log on and answer the questions and really give the Church some important feedback.
So Mary, remind us the basics here. What exactly is a synod and why are they held?
A synod is basically an advisory body. It's the bishops throughout the world chosen from geographical areas around the globe, and they're meant to advise the Holy Father on issues facing the Church in general, the universal Church throughout the world. And every once in a while they'll have a synod, this meeting of bishops, if there's a specific need in a specific area in the Church throughout the world. So they're just meant to give him advice, and then based on that the Holy Father can put forth, like he did after the last synod, an apostolic letter to kind of enhance the Church's teachings in various areas.
Very good. Well, we will definitely continue to cover the Synod. Mary Shevlin reporting from Rome. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
The Obama administration ends a long-standing policy allowing any Cuban arriving in the U.S. to stay and become a legal resident. The repeal of the wet foot, dry foot policy is the latest step by President Obama to normalize relations with Cuba. Relations between the United States and Cuba were stuck in a Cold War freeze for decades, but Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro established full diplomatic ties and opened embassies in their capitals in 2015. An Obama official says the Cubans gave no assurances about the treatment of those sent back to the country. Joining us now is Frank Calzone, Executive Director of the Center for a Free Cuba. So, Frank, this policy was put in place by President Clinton back in 1995. Now this is being reversed. What kind of impact do you think this will have on Cubans, Cuban Americans?
Very little impact. Clinton put that in place because he wanted to limit the law, which is the Cuban Adjustment Law. And according to the policy, some Cubans were being returned to Cuba anyway.
Well, how in general do Cuban Americans feel about the wet foot, dry foot policy?
Well, I think there's a discussion about it, but the way it was handled is, I think there's consensus that we do not like Mr. Obama. Talking to Raul Castro, the Cuban dictator knew the details of what Mr. Obama was going to do, while the U.S. Congress, the American people, and the media were kept in the dark.
Well, how have people in Cuba reacted to all of this?
This is a horrible thing. The Cuban government claims that the reason Cubans escape is because the United States welcomes them. But Cubans escape anywhere. You tell a Cuban you have a chance to go to Spain or to Equatorial Guinea, whatever, they go. They leave Cuba because there's no freedom, there's scarcity, there's no food. They leave Cuba because of a failure of a revolution that originally had promised human rights and progress.
President-elect Donald Trump has been tougher on Cuba, at least that's what he said on the campaign trail. Do you think Trump will reinstate that policy?
I don't know, but we do hope that the president-elect would look at the executive orders of Mr. Obama, and to the extent that they are illegal and to the extent that they are against the law, they should be changed.
How do you think this policy applies not only, or why do you think this policy has only been in place in Cuba specifically and not to other countries? Because there's so many other countries in it.
But it has not been. This policy was put in place when Poles were running away from communism in Poland, when Hungarians left, when people were jumping the Berlin Wall, when Soviet Jews going to come to America. And it's in that context that the Cubans got a special treatment. I don't believe that we have a Salvadorian Adjustment Act or a Mexican Adjustment Act. And yes, there are millions of people fleeing to America because of poverty and desperation. The same thing will continue to apply to Cuba.
Frank Calzone, Executive Director for the Center for a Free Cuba. Thanks so much for your insight.
Thank you, sir.
William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist, has died. Blatty was a former Jesuit school valedictorian who wrote the tale of the demonic possession in the best-selling novel and Oscar-winning movie. He appeared several times on EWTN's The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. The author was a proponent of a strong Catholic identity for Catholic institutions and promoted fidelity to church teaching. He was 89 years old. Coming up, a freshman Catholic congressman on his faith and what's on the top of his agenda in Congress. We continue highlighting freshman congressmen who are Catholic. Our Lauren Ashburn sat down with Representative Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin, as part of our series.
Congressman Gallagher, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You are a Marine veteran, served in Iraq, have worked in counterterrorism, and have just been named to the House Armed Services Committee. What's on the top of your agenda as a new member of Congress?
Well, I think to your point and reflecting my committee assignments, keeping the country safe is the first and foremost function of the federal government. I'm honored to have been appointed on the Armed Services Committee, and I'm looking forward to diving into that effort. And to do that, we need to get it to the urgent task of rebuilding the military, modernizing it for the 21st century, taking care of our service members, securing the border, and finding a way to tackle all the threats that we've seen proliferating across the globe, particularly in the last 8 years. So that's an effort that I'm excited to be a part of.
Do you believe the Obama administration has done a good job?
No, I think it's been a complete foreign policy failure. And I just think of my own experience. I deployed to Iraq in 2007 and 2008. I was part of the surge, and I saw it work firsthand. We took a country that was in relative chaos and turned it into order. And I just saw that happen first time. And I just remember my Marines walking around without their helmets, passing out books and school supplies to kids who couldn't even walk to school a year before. That's how successful they were. And then we flushed all those hard-won gains down the drain. And I remember going back to Iraq in a civilian capacity about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago and seeing that town that I deployed to, that town I left 8 years ago, now under ISIS control. And that's devastating. And I think more broadly, we've seen the deterioration of our position around the world, not just in the Middle East, where Christians are being persecuted at historic levels, but also in Eastern Europe or in the South and East China Sea. And we can't let that go on any longer.
There have been a number of ISIS-inspired attacks on U.S. soil. What do you think needs to happen to prevent attacks by homegrown terrorists?
Well, first and foremost, we can't allow politics to get in the way of our understanding of the threat. I would argue that's what's happened over the last 8 years. We have a president who won't even utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. We had a Justice Department that was editing the transcripts of the attacks after Orlando to efface any reference to radical Islam. That's our federal government lying to us. That needs to stop. We need to understand what we're facing. The second thing we need to do is understand that all of these domestic attacks are inspired by the fact that we have allowed a terrorist safe haven to grow and grow in the heart of the Middle East. And the longer we allow ISIS to gain and maintain territory in the heart of the Middle East, the more it grows in the hearts and minds of young Muslims across the world. So we cannot just throw up our hands and do nothing. We have to tackle this problem with a sense of urgency, and we need a comprehensive strategy to protect ourselves, not only in the homeland, but also our interests abroad.
Let's move on to another issue. You're a defender of life. How do you plan to support pro-life legislation?
Well, first of all, I want to really draw attention and praise to the efforts of some great groups we have in Wisconsin, Pro-Life Wisconsin, Wisconsin Right to Life, two of the most effective groups in the country. And as a result, we've seen the number of abortions go down in Wisconsin in recent years. Here at the federal level, I think we can start with some simple common sense steps. First, no taxpayer money should go towards abortions. I would also say we need to tackle and fight against late-term abortions. And then, more broadly, I would hope we can get to promoting a culture of life. And I think something that people on both sides of the aisle might agree upon is how do we streamline the process for adoptions? How do we make it easier for people that want to raise a child in a loving environment to do just that?
As an adopted person myself, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Now, you come from a big Irish Catholic family. How will your faith guide your service?
Yes, ma'am. Well, my family, first and foremost, taught me a respect for the dignity of life, and indeed that's why I'm a conservative, because I believe in individual human dignity, and I believe we have natural rights that were given to us by God, not the government. I also learned from my family a respect for service. I believe we can honor God through service and sacrifice. That's why I joined the military. That's why I'm doing this right now, and I believe that anyone, whether you're a congressman or a Marine or a dairy farmer, can honor God just by sanctifying your daily work. And finally, I would just say my family taught me the value of humility. I'm reminded of one of my favorite Bible verses, Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And I hope all of us can have a bit more humility in the months and years ahead. And what have we seen in the last 8 years with the arrogance of the federal government, assuming more power to itself and robbing that power and authority from the states and the local levels? I think we need to get back to what I would call the Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity, where we allow decisions to be made at a lower level.
Well, humility is not a virtue that we see much in this town, so I can't help but agree with you there. Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Up next, preparing for the next World Youth Day. I'll talk to an event organizer about how the event has shaped younger Catholics. Organizers are already preparing for the next World Youth Day taking place in Panama in 2019. The huge Catholic gathering was started by Pope John Paul II in 1985. Since then, millions of Catholic teens and young adults have taken part in World Youth Days around the world with Popes Benedict XVI and Francis. Iago de la Cierva was executive director of World Youth Day in Madrid and continues to help organize the events. He joins us now from Rome. Iago, 6 months after World Youth Day in Krakow, you're presenting your analysis of the event in Rome. According to your research, what impact did it have on young people who took part?
According to the survey we did, the impact was huge in the sense that most of the young people who went to Krakow had a very religious experience. They decided either to keep practicing or to go back to sacraments. And one of the most important facts was that almost half of the participants in Krakow went to confession, which is a very good news for the church.
Well, World Youth Days have been around for 30 years, hosted by 3 different popes. Iago, how have you seen them evolve?
I think World Youth Days have been more or less all the same, changing only a little details. I think the Vatican right now is thinking whether after 30 years some changes should be introduced in the system because of the new technologies available, because of the young people who think and behave and feel in another way, and also because the next one in Panama would be in an area during when it's not holidays in Europe or in North America. So they have to think something different.
Well, as you mentioned, the next World Youth Day is in Panama in 2019, and you're going there next week to meet with organizers. Can you tell us a little bit how so far preparations are going?
The preparations so far are going very well. There is a committee made by members of the state who is really, the government, the President Varela is really willing to make World Youth Day a big success there. And it's a key point. Because World Youth Days are really, really large events. And also they started already asking families to host pilgrims, and there are several thousand families already offering their houses to stay, and this is a very good thing. The committee already started working, and I'll be there next week in order to help them to understand all the tasks every single department has to do in the next 6 months. We will divide the work in terms of 6 months, so we keep also in track in terms of finance, in terms of volunteers, and in terms of communications as well.
Well, for those of us here at EWTN, we know how much work goes into preparing for World Youth Day. And so, Iago de la Sierva, World Youth Day organizer, thanks so much for telling us all about it.
Thank you.
Finally, tonight, the Bush children are welcoming Sasha and Malia Obama into the former First Children Club. Former President George W. Bush's daughters, Jenna and Barbara, wrote a letter with advice to the Obama sisters before the family moves out of the White House. In the letter, published online by Time, the Bush twins advised the Obama girls to draw on their many experiences during their time in the White House and to use them, quote, help guide you in making positive change. Very polite gesture. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Good night and God bless.